Hello and welcome to another episode of Topline Talks, a Mackie Myers podcast hosted by me, Owen Myers. Today, I'm delighted to bring another special Insights episode where we are doing deep dives into the core segments of the market that we serve. I'm joined today by Mr. Ryan Cooke, who is not his first time in the studio, so part of the furniture here, as well as leading our Oxbridge region and developing our broader executive offering. Ryan also plays the role of leading our global CleanTech practice. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Very good
to see you again.
Well, we're going to put the world to rights on all things CleanTech in the next 15 to 20 minutes, which is going to be very exciting. So just to lean into that, can you just tell us a little bit more about your background in the CleanTech space and what you're doing at the moment in that world?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, CleanTech is grossing. I mean, it's been growing in excess of 10% ahead of the whole economy for the last 4 or 5 years. So it's the whole net zero conversation is louder than it's ever been before, for good and bad reasons. But the green economy, particularly now in the UK, accounts for about 750,000 jobs. So it's really, really significant. How did I first come into contact with it? Primarily through battery technology. So obviously, as most people will know, I'm from Oxford. Oxford's the home of the battery. And it was probably 11, 12 years ago when I first started out my career, we would do an awful lot in what was then battery cell technology, the emergence of solar and wind. So roll on 10, 11, 12 years, 750,000 jobs in the UK, an enormous opportunity in automation now, and the cyclical economy of recycling battery technology as well at the same time. So there's a huge amount of activity. And where we're based, London, Oxford, Cambridge, you see immediate trends that pop up across each territory, whether that be around solar, whether that be around automotive, whether you see that around automation. And obviously, one of the key themes actually of now, which we're seeing an awful lot of, is technology as an aggregator across how electrification from the grid, oil and gas in traditional methods, solar, wind. So, yeah, it's been 10 and 11 years of a lot of clean tech. And actually, if I look at our business last year, by quite some distance, clean tech, along with one other sector, was our biggest grossing sector last year. Yeah. So, yeah, it'd be an interesting few years to come as well.
And obviously, in many ways, there are parts of the market which are a little bit hypocritical within clean tech, but broadly, it's trying to solve a long-term challenge. And as a B Corp business, obviously, it's something we're particularly passionate about. What are the top 2 or 3 things you think are influencing the broader market at the moment?
Well, we have to talk about the geopolitical situation. Yeah. I think it's not easy. And I think businesses are having to be really careful about the markets at which they focus into. And that's seen a massive rationalisation and correction over the last 4 or 5 years. So as much as we've seen green jobs grow in the UK, actually the backdrop of that is a very challenging market, A, to raise money, and B, from a market entry point of view, it's very competitive, but it's also really cutthroat. So runways change all the time. So I think geopolitically, it's a hot potato, and it'll be really interesting to see later on this year how the politics changes around net zero and the commentary on net zero. So I'd say that's one. I think from a job type perspective, is what's been really interesting is how artificial intelligence is now starting to play in the market, and this whole piece around aggregation. So we do a lot of work with businesses, to give you a prime example, on things like microgrids. So it's essentially a piece of technology, comes in lots of different shapes and sizes, but this particular example is where they're using a piece of hardware to aggregate the energy generated from solar panels or from wind or whatever it might be, and aggregating that across a set of apartments or a university campus. So the way in which actually technology is applied now over the top of renewable energy, I think, is what we're going to see a huge amount of activity on over the next 4 or 5 years, which actually plays into the whole broader conversation around AI and the job market. And I think that's exciting. I genuinely think that's really, really exciting. And hopefully takes away from the need to be producing a better solar panel or a more effective wind turbine. Actually, we're talking about how can technology leverage the existing infrastructure rather than us having to invest in what is an incredibly expensive investment in recreating the grid.
Absolutely.
For example.
I mean, obviously you've touched on some of it, but when you're sat across the table from an investor, a chief exec, a CFO, aside from geopolitics, which they can't really influence, funding, which is obviously partly within their control, but obviously there's multiple factors that go into that. But what else is it that's keeping them up at night? What are their main sort of problem statements, so to speak?
It's a mixed bag. It depends on what market they're playing in. I think, look, the primary one is globalisation. That for most CEOs is tough because genuinely, when you're going from geography to geography, the regulation looks very different.
And the supply chain network is getting ripped up by the day at the moment, right?
100%.
So,
yeah. So that whole how do I globalize sustainably is challenging. I think the other piece that is interesting, and more so in clean tech, is that whole starting point of how do I measure and verify the quality of my output as a business from an ESG perspective. And this isn't new. So we've got the whole piece on manufacturing 2030, and clean tech obviously plays a huge role in advanced manufacturing, which is one of the industrial strategic verticals that the government set out a few years back. But the biggest challenge for a CEO is who owns that? So often you'll find it's the CFO, but the CFO will have someone subordinate to them who will be looking at carbon emissions, for example, measuring that. How does that then reflect into the supply chain? That also brings out questions of where your data is stored, how do you manage it? And there are businesses that are now evolving themselves and producing solutions to help CEOs understand how they best scale sustainably and can measure and verify that. That's something that comes up all the time. I think the third thing is, from a people point of view, is having people that have got the battle scars of older technology who perhaps may have failed, but actually have learnt the lessons on the trials and tribulations of the net zero economy. Because there's been loads of success. 750,000 jobs is significant, growing in excess of our whole economy year on year, above 10%. It's all really impressive stuff. But actually, there's been a lot of casualties out there, and actually having people who've got those battle scars to take into startup scale-up is often what our customers are asking for. That's combined with storytelling, and that's not new. That's not a new concept specifically for clean tech, but because there's been so much change and it's been evolving so quickly, that ability to storytell and think about actually what's the best proposition for my business, whether I be CFO, COO, CEO, to get the quickest and best return is, a conversation we're having regularly. And the only other final piece is there is a climate emergency, and the nature of what climate tech is trying to achieve is a really good thing. And I don't think it's difficult to find people that can be motivated by that. But with all of the pressures that we have, particularly from China, it is about cost and managing cost effectiveness and market proposition. And that's hard. And you think about advanced manufacturing in the UK, it's not easy to do that at a cost competitive price in comparison to what can be produced in China and other parts of Asia. So that's another headache from a CEO's perspective, is trying to find people around the top table that can support in delivering effective impact, but also managing that cost base. And that's, again, a constant conversation, and it's tricky, really, really tricky.
And I guess, in the last few years, the various outbreaks of war as well has really shown how the whole energy infrastructure is so dependent on the global oil and gas prices and the global oil. So whilst you're trying to build something which is independent of that, it's still very dependent on the macro factors in that space, which is a real dichotomy, which is very difficult to. I know Ed Miliband's been talking about how do we change how the UK price those sorts of things so that we can start sort of treading a different path. But when you're in that space, it's a very difficult thing to navigate.
Extremely. One of our customers had a 3-year strategic plan, and they were managing margin, and they're in battery testing. And they've got a really significant global presence. So again, they can mitigate risk to an extent. But their central support service is run from the US. So they'd managed it perfectly from a margin perspective, and then tariffs came in. And that's impossible to manage. Impossible. So actually then it's a case of, okay, how can I now mitigate those tariffs over the next 3 years? And essentially it created a whole rebudgeting exercise. So it's those pinch points, and that business particularly is actually big enough to be able to weather a storm like that. But that's where we've seen the casualties, where, simple things like the introduction of tariffs, you couldn't have planned for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Onto the people side of things, how have you seen hiring has changed within the clean tech world?
So, so I think the general theme is that so much of the clean tech space is pioneering still. So we see a lot of movement from more highly regulated environments coming into the clean tech space. So from a corporate functions point of view, people that have come from financial services, life sciences, even governments transitioning into clean tech is being more and more. The other thing is around data. So more often than not, the bottom line of most clean techs that we work with is their ability to be data savvy, because so much is about this ability to measure and ability to verify. So that whole data awareness piece is really, really prominent in most conversations. I think the other thing is about the commercial awareness of understanding the market that you're in. So storytelling, big one. The ability to focus on margin performance, also a big one. And as regulation becomes greater and greater, and you think about coming back to batteries, Oxford, the home of the battery. But when you think about battery technology and when you think about charging networks, so much of the newer technology in that is pioneering. So there isn't really a North Star you can look to and go, how do we regulate this market? It's being created as it moves. So I think the ability to operate in an ambiguous market and be comfortable with that ambiguity, where you might have to take some risks because there isn't the framework already in place. So that really impacts on people. And you can think about certain individuals that are comfortable in an environment like that, and certainly people that would feel really uncomfortable about that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's a real theme.
Moving on from that aspect, when you're in the sector, either supporting on hiring projects or not, what are the big mistakes you see organizations make at whatever stage in the journey they're at when they hire? What are the sort of real blunders to avoid?
I mean, battle scars, I know it was an earlier point, but I think there are loads of examples where the sort of the lack of experience of having seen failure before, especially in this market, I think is a risk, a big risk, because of the volatility of how the market is. And actually, I was having a conversation the other day with a CEO, and his biggest learn from one of his battle scars was he was trying to solve problems with people. And he said, actually, you can't just solve the problem in climate tech particularly just with people. You have to get into a situation where the foundations are there, where the people can actually then have impact. And what he found is that very quickly he burnt through a lot of cash by just trying to solve every single problem with a new hire. And of course, when you're finding the ability to raise capital so hard, at the point at which you get that capital, if you're immediately expensing that on hiring a person per problem, that can become very expensive very, very quickly. So this whole piece around making sure that the foundational elements of your organization are set up properly, that's really important. And that does come through good board hiring, thinking about battle scars, and really thinking about the timing as well of when you onboard these people. And a classic mistake we see made in climate tech and clean tech more broadly is the timing of onboarding a CFO. Actually, do I need a CFO or do I need an advisor and a really strong controller? And actually, there is a stage when you're in the really early stage, probably going out on Series A or just received seed. At that point, I probably don't need a CFO. I probably need a really strong advisor. And we could support on that. We can find an advisor. what's really important is you can produce the numbers and you're managing risk and you're managing cash flow really tight. That requires a really strong controller. And there's so many occasions where we walk into a business, they've got 8 or 9 people, 15 people, 16 people. I need a CFO. Do you actually need a CFO? Because that can be a very expensive mistake.
Yeah. Okay. Some great takeaways. If on the flip side of things, if people have either just joined the sector or looking to get into the market more broadly, what advice would you give them from a career point of view?
Look, be motivated about it. I think this is one of these spaces where there is huge opportunity, but there is still massive question marks. So I think for me, whatever technology you're facing into, whether it be renewable technology, whether it be cyclical economy, whether it be large infrastructure, whether it be some of these technological aggregators that we're seeing coming through now in the market, being passionate about the technology. I think that's number one. I think the other thing is there is something really special about the fact that the climate emergency is not going to get any easier. So actually, if we can, from a corporate functions perspective, or even from a technical ops perspective, we can see that we're having impact on a new piece of technology that may well help reverse the situation that we're in. Again, I don't think is a difficult sell. The final point is about data. We really need data-savvy people, but are great at translating that to a changing market. So if we can understand the data, and we've got people that are comfortable dealing with large data sets, and then translating into what does it mean, and how do I then proposition that into the market, great.
Yeah.
This is the space for you.
Yeah.
And I think over time it will become more and more regulated. And who knows what the next 18 months, never mind the next 5 years, will look like.
Yeah.
But this will be a space that I think will continue to get more and more interesting.
Yeah, very, very good. So to close, a couple of points. What excites you most about the clean tech world?
It's all about impact. Is there a bigger talking point? And I come back to 750,000 jobs now, and we're right at the start of this. We've got 2030 on the horizon, where we've got to get into a situation. The whole manufacturing community needs to understand what their ESG performance is, and we need to be able to report on that, and it needs to be auditable. So we've got all these checkpoints coming down the track. I think this is going to get really, really interesting. I think the introduction of AI is going to make this a really interesting space. So I'd definitely be excited about that. And I think use automotive as an example. These are massive, massive markets, and clean tech has disrupted that market enormously. And I think if we can, in this particular space, have such an enormous impact on the global economy by recreating how people think about something as daily as driving, I think that's more than enough to be excited about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Exciting space to be in. And just to underline the conversation, what 3 words would you use to describe the market?
Words.
It's 3 words.
3 words.
3
yeah.
words.
Look, cash intensive, that's 2 words. I do know that, but it is cash intensive, capital intensive. Innovative, pioneering. It is pioneering. Some of this technology is mind-blowing. So I think to be right in the forefront of something where the regulation isn't even written yet, and you're playing in a market where the book isn't written, I think that's really exciting.
I think as you were pausing to think there, the 3 words, which is one phrase that came to my mind, was champagne and razor blades.
Yeah, it is.
Because, and actually people that are looking at the market need to be comfortable that there's massive upsides and exciting bits. But as you referenced earlier, there's some things that go wrong quite quickly. Factors that are completely outside of your control. So being comfortable with that uncertainty and top to bottom is super important.
Yeah, and the verticals, I know I've said it a few times, but this is a market that's grown quicker than the whole of the UK economy. You think about all the other verticals that have had such volatile performance over the last even 5 years. They're incredible figures. And that's in a geopolitical environment where, we've got some big political leaders that are very skeptical about the whole net zero agenda. Despite that, we're still seeing those numbers, and we're still supporting 750,000 people.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, but you're right, there are many razor blades as there are champagne moments.
Yeah.
Be interesting few months ahead.
Very good. Well, Ryan, that's been fascinating. Thank you very much for your insights, and thanks for joining on the pod. That's been another episode of Topline Talks. Thank you very much for listening.